Welcome back to the Bold Moves podcast. We are glad that you have joined us today. Today we're going to have some fun because we're kicking off a new series at Crossroads. It's called Hot Mess. And it goes all along the life of Moses. So let's talk about that. There's a lot of people who know all about Moses. There's a lot of people who don't know much about Moses at all because they're new to their faith and new to their relationship with Jesus. So talk to me about Moses, you guys. What do you know? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
I think Moses killed a guy.
Yes, Moses did in fact kill a guy, which reminds me of one of my favorite, judge me all you want. It reminds me of the scene from Anchorman where all the news anchor teams are fighting each other. And afterwards they say, oh, things escalated really quickly. They say, yeah, Brick killed a guy. And he's holding a trident. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, good for you. But if you know what I'm talking about, you know that's pretty funny.
What a comparison, Moses and
Brick Tamlin.
Unbelievable. But yes, Moses killed a guy. Yeah, things escalated quickly. That is correct. Yeah. Kristen, what do you know? What do you know about Moses?
I watched The Prince of Egypt as a child, and that's how I learned.
Well, growing up, every Easter they always had the 10 Commandments on TV.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Ben, was that the guy who played Ben-Hur? Who's the actor in that? Charlton Heston?
Charles Heston, maybe?
It's so terrible that I don't know. Charlton Heston.
It was filmed before I was born, so I have all the excuses.
Yeah. I have vague memories of that growing up. It's probably made the same year I was born. But yeah, that was a famous movie. So to be clear, what you guys know about Moses is from kid movies and old-time movies. I mean, I feel
like I've probably learned a little bit more than that along the way. But yeah, that's probably where it started.
Kristen, what did you learn about Moses in the movie Prince of Egypt?
I just remember he was a baby in the basket. And,
he was a baby in the basket.
Yeah.
Maybe some alligators kind of after him.
He was in the Nile River, and he was taken out by the princess, the Pharaoh's daughter.
Yeah, and then his sister, got him back over to his mom as a wet nurse or whatever she was.
But Pharaoh's daughter wanted him, and so he moved into the palace.
Yeah,
and
then he grew up, killed a guy, and
grew up and killed a guy.
Went through the Red Sea, and
you know what? That's a pretty decent. There's a couple of other details in there.
It's a great movie. We should bring it back.
It's a great movie. Prince of Egypt, 5 stars from Kristen. Well done. 2 thumbs up. So Moses is a really interesting character in the Bible for all of these reasons mentioned. He literally, his life was a hot mess. And yet Moses is one of the most instrumental leaders in the Old Testament who God used to lead his people out of captive and slavery in Egypt. So Moses is a critical figure in the history of Israel, even though his life was a hot mess. And I have to say, I'm thankful. I always go back to that idea. I'm thankful that when I look through the Old Testament specifically and see some of these people who God chose to lead his people, I'm so thankful that we can all relate to them at some level. To be clear, I've never killed a guy. I've never done that. Okay. However, some of the insecurities and fears and excuses that Moses had along the way, it's like, no, I resonate with that. I could have been Moses there. And yet God still used him. And I, for one, am thankful. God takes all of our imperfections and still uses us. Does anybody else feel that way?
Yeah, that's for sure. We all feel that way. But even I don't know, it's I always try to take encouragement in moments like that. I can have messed up and screwed up and been a hot mess my whole life and never done anything right, but it just takes a little bit of obedience.
Yes.
And saying yes to Jesus and following the path that
you can turn it right around.
Man, it can happen so fast.
Yeah.
God's power through you is better than anything you could ever do on your own anyway.
Absolutely.
Right? Parting the Red Sea. Yeah. That's crazy.
Everything he did was with such crazy uncertainty.
Yes.
So
in the middle of that, in the middle of the hot mess and the uncertainty and the fears and the insecurities, I think the lesson that we have to learn in the life of Moses is that even though he was a hot mess, God was still there. The presence of God was with him. And every time Moses was afraid or insecure, God showed up and God provided. And in the Old Testament, that word for God providing, the name for God is Jehovah Jireh. The Lord will provide is specifically what that means. And you see God's provision in the life of Moses over and over and over again. That despite the chaos, despite the mess, God was there. And I love that in our lives today, we can all resonate with that. Even though Moses' lifetime was thousands of years ago, we can still resonate with those practical and relevant instances where he interacts with God, he interacts with the people around him, and we can all resonate with being overwhelmed, insecure, afraid, faulted, like we do not have it together, and yet God is still with us and God provides. And I love those moments where people step out in faith, and even though they don't have all the answers, it seems kind of blurry, you don't know how this is going to work, you trust that God is with you and that he's going to provide. And we're bringing someone on today for 5 good minutes to talk about a story that they've been going through that kind of details that same path. And so I say we welcome Ashley LeCount to the podcast for the very first time for 5 good minutes.
That's good.
Ashley, thank you for joining us today for 5 good minutes. It's good to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Kristen is having a meltdown because it appears that there's like crooked pictures or an elk or something in the background. What's going on? Is there a history here that I'm not aware of? What's going on?
No.
Well, she informed me earlier today that she would prefer a minimalist look. And as the preschool director, my office is not minimalist at all. So
that's
neither is my life.
I told her when I was teaching, everything, like when I displayed art or whatever, everything is in rows, like columns straight across.
You're one of those people.
I don't like the cluster or the random, but and she was like, great opinion. Take it home with you.
I did say it.
That's beautiful. So we're entering right into the middle of drama and arguments. This is great. This is fantastic. I love the behind the scenes information that's coming out right now. It's so good. So Ashley, we're talking about just kind of navigating chaos. Like sometimes life is just a hot mess. And we were laughing that it doesn't really matter. Like it seems like, at least in the professional world here, whatever you throw at Ashley, it's just not chaos. She figures it out and handles it. Like it's pretty amazing.
Exactly. I said before you came on here, I was saying earlier that Ashley doesn't have any chaos in her life. She handles everything really, really well. Yeah. And then you throw me under the bus and I have organizational issues.
Kristen was speaking so highly of you, and then you attacked her viciously. Okay, that's good.
Okay.
That's funny. We're off to a good start. When we talk about the idea of God providing and showing up in the mess, you've been going through a pretty amazing process with your family, and I think you're at the point where you can say you've seen God show up. I mean, do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I feel like there's a great story here.
Sure. So about 7 years ago, my husband and I felt the call to be foster parents.
Yeah.
And so we knew it was a call from God just from our foundation and going to church and all of that. And we knew it was going to be crazy and hard because we both work full-time jobs. We have 2 of our own children, 2 biological boys. And so we're like, how are we going to do this? And I was like, well, there's no other way to do it besides through God's strength. And so we had a few placements, so on and so forth. And then in 2022, I was down actually at the St. Pete campus with Remington and Michelle. We were starting the Celebrate Recovery there.
That's awesome.
And the night before I was supposed to come home, I got a call from DCS. And so they typically do this with placements. They call and say, would you be willing to open your home to these kids? And you say yes or no, depending on the requirements or what needs they have. And so they called and she's like, hi, Ashley, I know that you're probably going to say no, but would you be interested in taking twin boys? They're 8 months old. And I'm like, are you kidding me? No. And so I called Ryan. I said, you'll never believe it. DCS called us for twins. And he's like, yeah, not a chance. And I was like, I know. And so then that whole night, I could not sleep. I was just wrestling with this, like thinking, like, what if we were supposed to say yes to them? And Ryan called me the next day, and I was in the airport flying home, and he said, Ash, I think we need to say yes.
Wow.
I was like, I think so too. I could not sleep. And he's like, I know. And he was in Arkansas still because it was spring break. So I flew home, prepared our house for twins, and they came. I worked on Sunday morning at the church and went and picked them up that night. And
and that's how that journey began.
It'll be 3 years in March.
You know, the craziest part of that story is that Ryan was in Arkansas for spring break.
You know, I was thinking the same thing. Ashley, what does one do on spring break in Arkansas? What's happening there?
I have no idea. He was with his brother, so they were doing something.
That's so good. I love, Corey, that you had the same thought. Like, wow, you guys know how to party.
Did you
Spring break in Arkansas?
Did you visit the original Walmart or something?
Probably.
That is perfect. So how has that journey been, Ashley? Because I think there's a lot of people that consider fostering or adoption and just kind of are nervous about what that looks like, because it's a risk, right? Because emotionally,
really
I mean, talk us through like the process of how you got into where you are, like some of the highs and the lows. What's been good and what's been tough?
Sure. So, as foster parents, our goal was always just to provide a safe place for the children so that their parents can get healthier back on their feet. It wasn't necessarily adoption. However, we were open to that.
Sure.
But we talked to our boys, Lincoln and Luke, and they were all on board, and they knew kind of the mission that we had for it was just to provide a safe place for the kids. And so that was our goal with the twins. But as time went on, we kind of realized that it looked more permanent with them.
Yeah.
And so it's hard because I cry for the first week anytime I get a placement because I'm crying because I'm sad for the mom who just lost her baby, I'm sad for the kids. And then I'm like, what if they leave us? Like, how's that going to impact us selfishly?
There's so many emotions coming from so many directions with that. Like, that's really difficult. Really difficult.
Yeah. Yes. And so, it's been an up and down journey. You know, they would see their biological parents and then they wouldn't, then they would see them and then they wouldn't. And then they talked about terminating parental rights and then they didn't terminate and then they did. And so it's just been up and down. But throughout this whole story with the twins, we've seen God provide. We took 2 babies on knowing that we both work full time. My parents thought we were semi-crazy, which we were. But that's kind of what it looks like to follow God. You know, you don't know what the path is going to look like, but we knew that with God's strength that we could do it. And like childcare just popped out of nowhere. Like we had a babysitter within the next week to watch the boys. And then we got into a place so that we could continue our jobs. And our big boys, Lincoln and Luke, I mean, they just fell head over heels in love with them.
Oh, that's so
they actually
great.
share a bedroom and they do not want to move out. I mean, they want to be together. And it's really cool to see how it's changed our family dynamic too.
Yeah.
It's been a blessing for us, actually. It's grown us closer together and to Jesus, ultimately.
Yeah, so good.
Ashley, I love that whole journey began with a sleepless night. Like you had a sleepless night. Ryan had after immediately saying, "No, that's ridiculous."
Are you kidding? Twins? That's too chaotic.
Yes.
That's too scary.
It's like, no, that is like the pinnacle of what in my mind is a hot mess. Like, oh, yeah, just take on random twins. Yes, awesome. No big deal. Throw a grenade in the middle of your family life and all the routines. Like, just take on twins. And yet, to be able to be willing to listen to the voice of God and to trust that, and then to walk through that journey and see Him provide, that's pretty amazing. And to think about the dynamic and the changes that your kids have been able to, like for Lincoln and Luke, to see that and be on that journey with you, like that's powerful, Ashley. And I just think it's amazing what's happening.
Yeah.
Well, we've had great people supporting us as well and lots of help, and it is chaotic. It's a hot mess half the time. I mean, we don't know what our days are going to look like because someone will throw a fit or spill milk, or literally one push the other one down in a hamper down our stairs on this past weekend on Sunday. So yes, our house can be a hot mess and chaotic. But I remember early on, like I just kept praying, like, God, we trust your plan for these boys. We trust your plan for our family, and just give us your strength tomorrow to get through the day. We just had to take it day by day.
That's sometimes all we can do, and God shows up. He really does provide, and that's amazing. So, Ashley, thank you for coming on and sharing that story. I mean, honestly, it's a witness. That's the power of our story, our testimony. God shows up, God provides, and I love to see what's happening there. Congratulations. We're so excited for you and thrilled for you, and you're making a huge difference in the life of those boys. How amazing is that? So keep at it. This is great stuff. And Kristen, before she leaves, any parting shots that you'd like to comment on about her background or her office or the pictures or anything, or is everything good in your mind?
I think it's great.
All right, look at that. You've met all of Kristen's expectations. You've really did it. The
stair angle with the whiteboard or whatever. Is that a whiteboard or is it a sign? I don't know.
Well, there's a whiteboard and a sign. They're both straight across.
Ashley can't do anything about the stare angle. It is what it is.
The stare angle.
I think she should just turn it so it goes
with the stairs. Okay, this is
Okay.
crazy. This is out of hand. Ashley, thank you. Those are 5 great minutes. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Those were 5 great minutes with Ashley. I love hearing her heart and that story. Her and Ryan stepping out in faith are making a huge impact in the lives of those 2 kids. And they're adorable, by the way. I mean, and I love to see that step of faith that they took, because it's truly, when you're in the middle of that level of chaos and God keeps you awake at night saying, maybe say yes.
Yeah.
That's a big step of faith.
I love watching their family dynamic from like their older 2 boys' perspective, like because it was just the 4 of them for so long.
Sure.
And then they added in these 2 babies at the same time. And I'm sure, I don't know what that would be like being, they were maybe like 5 to 7 years old in there.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's amazing. Big. Yeah. It is crazy, but it's stepping into those moments and recognizing that God will provide. There are similarities again between like the life of Moses and the stories that we find ourselves in today, because Moses had all the insecurities. Later on in the story, when God asked him to lead, he's like full of excuses. He's like, well, God, certainly you don't mean me. He's like, I can't even speak well. Like, this, just send someone else.
Yeah.
Like, that's how he feels. And yet God's asking him to trust him. Like, hey, in the mess, I still believe in you. I'm calling you. Trust me, I will provide. And that, man, if you can get to that moment in your faith, that's when everything changes.
The excuses can only take you so far. God is persistent. He's not going to give up.
Yes.
And I don't know. I think it's really cool just thinking some of the Bible characters, I mean, just a branch beyond Moses.
Yeah.
You talk about hot mess. I mean, there's not a single one you can point to and say, this guy is the one who had it all together.
Right.
Actually, they all sucked.
They all had flaws. They did. Some of them were the worst. Some of them were terrible.
We're not talking about Jonah, but Jonah actually is the worst. The biggest complainer I've ever seen.
Yes.
Anyway, I don't know. I just think that's funny. Like, Moses had legitimate reasons. The same way that Ashley and Ryan had legitimate reasons to immediately say, absolutely not.
Twins?
Right.
There's no way.
No.
But God has a way of just getting your attention and forcing you to get past those insecurities. And I think you just realize like the rhythm of trust when you're in those positions that God forces you, says, you're going to get past this thing. Moses, these insecurities, these things that are keeping you from doing the things that I'm calling you to do. You're going to get past them. And in the process, you're actually going to learn how I'm going to provide everything for you along the way.
Well, if you think about it, some of the most powerful testimonies that when we hear, they're not normal. they're a hot mess. Yeah. That's just, I don't know. Like, do we often ask like, I want a testimony, but make it normal. You know,
right.
Is that what we want of God? And
the only way you get a crazy testimony is by stepping out in faith. And I think there's truth to this idea that I think that the place where God wants us to live when we're in the middle of the mess is being willing to go to the edge of what I can do on my own. Yeah. And then just saying, God, if this is going to happen, like what you're calling me to is real, I'm going to the edge of what I can do on my own. Now I need you to show up. And that's where it happens.
Sure.
That's where God comes to life. It's us living by faith and saying, I can only go this far. This happens if you show up. And man, that's where God he reveals himself and he provides. And those are the moments that give us our stories. Yeah. Those are the moments where everything changes and you can see God moving and God working. That's fantastic. It's
good.
Yeah, it blows right through the hot mess and it just shows that God is with you and that God provides.
He's faithful. He's always there. He's always going to give you exactly what you need in exactly the right moment that you need it. Right?
Yes. And in spite of all of our fears and all of our insecurities and all of our flaws, because we all have them. And we know, I know my flaws, I know my fears more than anyone else. I know that. And yet I still have to trust that God's called me and that he's going to take care of it. He will provide.
And the goal isn't to have everything figured out and planned out, because that's actually defeats the purpose of trust.
Yes.
Right.
If you are in a moment and you just know, if you can get into the rhythm of just knowing, I'm going to take a step and God's going to provide the solid foundation for me to step on every time I take a step, even though I can't see where my foot's going to land.
Yeah.
That, I think, is exactly the right rhythm that he calls us to.
Yeah. Kristen, did you have any I feel like you had a couple of points of interest to point out the similarities between Moses and the twins that Ashley has.
I said they were all in a basket. One's going down the Nile River and the other one's going down the stairs.
And in both instances, it's a hot mess. It's crazy.
Yeah.
That's right.
So I guess my thing as we wrap this up and bring this home, I think what we have to recognize is when we talk about the idea of life being a hot mess, that really truly does apply to every single one of us. It's like not like, oh, I've got issues and no one else does. No, we all have our issues.
Yeah.
And we all have our fears. We all have our insecurities. We all have our reasons why God wouldn't want to use us or why it should be someone else.
Right.
I think the bold move is trusting that if God is asking you to step out, take that step, go as far as you can on your own, and then trust that God's going to provide, that he's going to show up. Yeah. And so I would just encourage anyone who's watching today, if God's speaking to you in an area of your life, asking you to take a step of faith, man, just be willing to make that bold move, because it's in those moments of boldness where I trust in God's provision that he shows up and he shows off. And that's what gives us our story. So if we learn anything else from Moses today, make that bold move, trust that God is with you, and that's where God will show up. I pray that everyone that's watching and listening today will experience that presence of God in their life today. And as we go our separate ways, be bold and make that bold move today.
Even if instead of watching, you're washing.
What are you washing? Are you washing dishes? Are you taking a shower?
You guys are the worst. Why do you make fun of me so? Thank you for watching. This has been the Bold Moves Podcast. Have a great day.